Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about the different kinds of glazes and the way that you can create depth of surface with your ceramics. I'm assuming that most of you that are watching my videos are beginners, so that's where I'm going to start with this video when it comes to glazing. I love to glaze, and I know I hear a lot of potters say, oh, I hate glazing, and that I'm always confused by. I love every aspect of ceramics, from working on the wheel to even reclaiming my clay. Every ounce of it I love, but I especially love surface design. I tend to be more of a forms person. In other words, you can see that I spend a lot of time perfecting my forms. But I've recently changed from working in high fire ceramics to low fire, and I find you don't get the same depth of surface with low fire ceramics as I did when I was doing high fire cone 10 reduction firing, wood fire, or assault or soda firing. However, I no longer have access to those kinds of kilns, so because of that, I'm trying to really up my ceramic surface. And in doing that, I'm using all kinds of materials. I'm using underglazes, I'm using over-glazes, I'm using just plain cone 6 glazes, I'm using both commercial and homemade glazes that I've made myself. So first, let's talk about the different kinds of glazes. We have underglazes that Speedball makes them. These are great for silk screening on clay, and I'll do another video on that someday soon. But these are made specifically for silk screening on clay. So for that reason, all of the particles in this underglaze, which it's an underglaze, that means it goes under the main glaze. All these particles have been milled, so they're really tiny, and this fits through a screen really well. So that's one of the reasons that Speedball is really great for silk screening on clay. There are other kinds that are, of course, is Amico, which is the most popular underglazes. These come in a wide range of colors, every color of the rainbow. And what's nice is today they even have true reds that stay nice and bright to cone 6. So that's relatively modern. Just 10 years ago, you couldn't get a bright red to cone 6. So that's relatively new. And Amico velvet underglaze are a favorite of a lot of artists these days. But every company out there makes underglazes. This is another one that was just, some obscure company that sent me a pack of underglazes, and they work just like the other ones, so I've been using them. You can also find underglaze pens, and these have a little bit of wax in them. So if you wanted to create a nice thin line and keep that yellow line, because this one's yellow, from blending into the color around them, I would use one of these pens. We also have mason stains, and mason stains, they come in all different colors. Again, these are added to homemade glazes or underglazes to create your own colors. So artists that are working with mason stains typically blend several mason stains together to create their own color. Although I see a lot of artists out there using the colors directly from mason and how mason makes them, which is perfectly fine too. I just keep them in this little jar because I don't want to contaminate them with something else. So I also make my own underglazes. That's what this is, and I'm using a Grossly borate, a little bit of ball clay, and a colorant, in this case a mason stain, to create my own underglaze. And this works quite well too. If you have something and you don't have the color quite the way you want to, you can mix your own. I will show you how to do that in another video. They also have what they call watercolor underglazes. So watercolor underglazes come in these little packs, and they work just like watercolors. So if you're a watercolorist, this is the perfect situation for you to paint on your surface, because these work exactly like watercolors. If you don't want a matte surface, you will have to go over these with a clear glaze, because again, these things that I've just showed you are underglazes. So in other words, they go underneath the glaze. All of these can be applied at the leather hard stage and at the bisqueware stage. But remember, if they're not covered with a glaze, a traditional glaze, you're going to have a really matte, kind of dry surface. So it is usually the procedure that we cover these underglazes with some kind of other glaze. There's all kinds of things you can do with underglazes to create all kinds of patterns and textures and surfaces. Also, we work with Underglaze Transfers. So like in this particular case, that background is an Underglaze Transfer that I bought. This particular one is a commercial one with the blue, and I added this while the tile was in the leather hard stage. Now the kitty on here was added as a decal as the overglaze. So in other words, that decal was put on after this piece was vitrified or the glaze firing, and then it was fired again at about cone 18 to put this kitty image on there. So let me show you what transfer paper looks like. So I just showed you that tile, and you can see here that this is the what I have left of this tissue paper transfer. So you can see that this transfer created this pattern on this tile. So we'll talk about how to do that too, but that's just another way to decorate your surface. And Underglaze Transfers, they come in all different shapes and sizes. Of course, I have some kitties here. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and they, or you can make your own. I've made some of my own. I use some commercial. I like to use a mix of all of those things together. It helps me to be creative. If you are a working artist and you are selling your work, my advice is to change these up, to not use them exactly how they are, because that's not very artistic. That means that you're using somebody else's artwork on your pieces. But if I took these and I didn't use this as a pattern, and I just took one or two kitties and I maybe put them in a situation where they're with some flowers or something else, I'm actually expanding on the kitty design, which is another artist design, but I'm making it my own by combining it with some other things. For instance, these little magnets. So that's the right way. So this little magnet. So the kitty is a decal that was fired on at the very last part, but the flowers were all hand done by me. So you can see how me adding the kitty on top after the glaze firing kind of added a depth of surface to this little magnet. So those are just some of the ways that I'm using underglazes. So these patterns were hand painted on using the underglazes that I just showed you. Also, we can use the underglazes to create an interesting pattern on our surface. So for instance here, I used a pink underglaze that is a homemade underglaze in my arsenal. I'm known as the Pink Lady. And I went ahead and put a couple stripes on here just to add a little depth of surface. And then the black is a black underglaze, and I used a stencil that I took a picture from my garden. This is actually lupin and some other flowers from my garden. Took a picture of those. I altered that picture so I could make a stencil for it, and from my Cricut I made a stencil and used black underglaze to make this. So that was put on during the leather hard stage. Then it was fired. Then I glazed it in this soft matte glaze, And then I used the same Cricut file to create this decal using a gold decal sheet, and I cut that out on my Cricut. So you can see that I've used several techniques on this one piece and really brought that surface alive. So there's all kinds of things you can do with your glazes. So also, if you don't want to have that much graphics going on, for instance, this piece right here is made from a translucent porcelain, and if I do this, you can see how translucent it really is. See how you can see through there. So I didn't want to do too much to the surface of this piece because it's beautiful in and of itself. So just the underglaze lines, and if you can see here, the underglaze line created a little bit of a flashing of green around, which added a little bit more interest to this cup. So another way you can add interest to your surface. And here's another example of a tile that I've used Underglaze Transfer on the background. That little pattern you see in the background is Underglaze Transfer on newsprint that I made myself. Then I fired a kitty on there. This little kitty is a stencil kitty. Then I put glaze on it, and it was kind of an ugly blue, and it didn't come out of the kiln the way I really liked it. So I didn't just give up. What I decided to do was do another glaze firing, and then I put a silver kitty on there to add interest. So a piece that I would have normally just thrown in the garden because it wasn't worth selling, I brought back to life by glazing again and using the decals. Here's another example where I'm using all of those techniques. So all this patternly and the X's and the O's were put on during the leather hard stage on the pure white porcelain. Then it was fired, and then when it came out of the firing, I went ahead and put this light blue translucent glaze over it. Came out of the firing, I got it back. I still wasn't happy with it. I thought it needed a little bit something else. So that's when I added the little gold accents and fired those little gold accents and decals on. This is another decal. So you can see that I have quite the depth of surface on this. And I'm using several different glazing techniques to make this one cup. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks, is all these different techniques, and I'll be showing those to you. I know that there's a ton of videos on YouTube about underglazes and underglaze transfers and stencils and everything else. I'm still learning, so I hope you will learn something from my videos, but please watch other ones, and if you have advice for me, I'm more than willing to be open, and please share with me. In fact, I'm going to take a workshop in the next few weeks. Because I need to brush up on my skills. So let's talk about glazing a little bit more. So glazes, actual traditional glazes, are made from the molecular structure of the earth elements that are in the glaze. So what does that mean? That means that it does not work like paint. That's the short answer. It works more. It's more about the molecular weight of each earth element and how those earth elements work together. Without going into a whole bunch of chemistry, just know that every ingredient in a glaze has a different molecular weight. Because of that, it's important that you blend your glazes thoroughly. And when I say blend, I mean mix them up thoroughly, and keep something inside the bucket so you can continuously mix it, because even though you just mixed it, you turned around and you got your piece to go dip into your glaze, in the course of that 2 seconds, some of those really important ingredients in the glaze have settled to the bottom of the bucket and won't end up on your pot if you're not mixing up your glaze. So let's talk about how these glazes are. If you go to a typical studio, you'll see huge 5-gallon buckets everywhere filled with glazes with the name of the glaze on them. I also work with those big buckets. I only have 5-gallon buckets in my own personal studio for glazes that I use quite often, that are my base glazes, like my clear and my black. Those are the only two 5-gallon buckets I have, because I'm not a big woman and I don't want to be carrying around 5-gallon buckets. I'm getting a little bit older, still strong because I'm a potter, but I don't want to be hurting my back. I would like to be a potter well into my hundreds. So to continue to do that, I keep my buckets little so I don't have to lug around a bunch of stuff. But what's surprising to most people is that they have this idea that glazes work like paint. Underglazes do work like paint. China paints do work like paint. But regular glazes that are dipped, poured, or even painted on do not work like paint. In fact, you open up the bucket and you'll see that inside the bucket is not the same color as the ultimate piece will be. So I'm going to show you the color of this glaze, and then I'm going to show you the color that it actually turns out. So this glaze actually turns out to be this color. And as you can see, what's this color? Sorry, wrong color. This color. As you can see, they don't look anything like this color. So that's why it's really important to mark your bucket so you know what's in your bucket, because this could look just like I just did this other glaze. So for instance, these two glazes are exactly the same glaze, just with different colorants added to the glaze. Working like this, if you find a glaze that works with the porcelain or with the clay that you're working with, stick with it. Just change the color of that glaze. That's going to save you money in the long run, because you won't have to buy a lot of different ingredients for a lot of different glazes. So for me, I have 3 main glazes. They have mostly all the same ingredients, other than the colorants. So that keeps my costs down when it comes to making lots of different glazes. You ever go to an art show and you walk into somebody's ceramic booth and you'll notice that they have everything is in 1 or 2 colors. That's because of buying raw materials and how you buy them, and because it's more cost effective to have 1 or 2 glazes than a studio that has 15 different glazes. The only place you're going to find that these days is in college or community studios, and even community studios are cutting down on that to save costs. I'd like to see them save costs than rather get rid of the whole program, so that's not a bad thing to do. So you can see here I kind of have this chain of my glazes. So what I do is that I throw these rings on the potter's wheel, and then I add them to this chain and hang this in my studio. So if I need a reference about how a glaze looks on the surface, I have one readily available. I did the same thing with those underglazes. So I have a whole bunch of these in the studio, and they just help me have a reference to what the color is actually going to be when it's fired. Because again, it doesn't always look the same in the bucket as it will when it's fired. Okay? So something can be yellow in the bucket, but then turn out to be clear. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's real quickly talk about these test tiles. You can just use regular flat tiles for your test tiles, but it is important to do test tiles for various reasons. One is you want to know what it looks like. You don't want to just spend all kinds of time making something that is absolutely beautiful and then not know how the glaze is going to work out. So for that reason, having test tiles around the studio is important. Also, if you're trying a new color or something like that, you want to make sure that it works in place well with the glaze that you're using. Something that I often do is, because I use a pink underglaze that I make myself that is kind of a signature color for me, I always put that on the back, and then I do a black line of underglaze on the front. I also add some kind of feature that sticks out so we can see how that glaze will look and break over a pattern. I also stamp my sample so I can see how that glaze is going to break over a sample. So looking at this tile gives me a lot of information. It tells me that it's translucent. It tells me that I can see barely the pink through there. It tells me that it's the same on a raised surface than it is on a flat surface. And it tells me that it does not necessarily break over an inlaid surface. Also, I don't know if you can tell because of the colorant, I have double dipped that from here to here. So from here and up to, from here to here is one dip, and from here to here is two dips. So this gives me an idea of what it's going to look like if it's on thin or if it's on thick. On this particular glaze, it doesn't make that much difference, but some glazes that makes a huge difference. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. I'll show you. Also, something to consider in the mix would be commercial glazes. I use commercial glazes for colors that I couldn't get easily by making my own glazes. These commercial glazes are great for that. I would not recommend, if you're a production popper, using commercial glazes because it's extremely expensive. If you're doing one or two pieces and you're using commercial glazes as accents, that's a whole different story. But both of these are quite expensive, and they require 3 coats brushed on. It's not an easy dip like regular. I buy these because I can't get the bronze or the gold any other way. It would be, well, there are other ways I could get it, but it would be way more expensive than making a 5-gallon bucket for something that I'm only using as accents. So in that particular case, I'm buying the commercial glazes. So that's another way to create depth of surface. You can combine all different kinds of commercial glazes with your regular glazes to create your own signature surface.